Great. Thank you for joining us today here at the beautiful Betty Rodriguez Regional Library. Before we get to talking about the topic that you've come to discuss today, which is the very exciting one, I think, the continued relevance of print books in our current age. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourselves. Introduce yourselves to us. A little bit about your background with this topic.
Did you want to go first?
Sure. My name's Fae Giffen. I am a librarian at Fresno County Public Library. I'm also somebody who grew up reading constantly. I probably went through a lot of periods of my life where I had more book friends than real live friends. So books and stories and storytelling has always just been a huge part of my life. And how we access stories has always been something that's of particular interest to me. And I think like this subject that's really about the medium of how we're accessing stories is a really interesting idea.
I can relate to so many points there, especially book friends. I'm Natalie Margulis, and I'm a book collector, and I run a website where I sell used rare books, but mostly I'm a book collector, and I have been a reader since I was very little. My parents first thought that maybe I'd be an actress or something, because I would memorize books and I'd read them out loud, and they thought, oh, she wants to act, but no, I just really wanted to read. And I have just gotten out of a lot of tough situations, through reading, and just it's really made me curious about the world, and that's, I think, what's, it's a really important quality to have, a curiosity.
So just to kind of pick up on what you said, Natalie, about literature, access to books, getting you out of tough spots, or at least enriching your life in ways that it might not otherwise be. Can you tell us maybe about, and this is both for Natalie and Faye, but can you tell us about maybe some like key experiences that are memorable for you that relate to having books in your life?
Well, I would say that they can get you through difficult times and also enrich, like you just mentioned. But I remember being in middle school, and it was a really angsty time, and just really, I think no one has a good time in middle school, and if you do, I don't know. And so I
we don't know about you.
yeah, I don't know. I want to know what your secret is. Tell me. But I was sort of looking for things that I felt like no one understood me, no one, and no one knew how hard it was at that time, and of course, people did. Every experience has been written down in a book, I think, and there's always, one book that you can find that you can absolutely relate to, or have it, be, just what you needed at that moment. I remember David Copperfield, which is an unusual pick for a middle school girl, maybe. But that, and I was like, maybe things aren't so bad. Dickens, that was pretty rough, and it was really inspiring to me in a way, and it just really made me think like, wow, what else can I read about? And it really sort of not distracted me, but it made me feel like connected to other people in a way that made me feel like I could probably connect to anyone, and that sort of enriched me and, did help me feel, it helped the angst a little bit.
Well, I was just painfully shy. It's something like I worked on as an adult, because there were certain things in my career I wanted to do that required me to be able to, talk to people. And, but that was like a learned skill. And so, especially before I started school, I was just very shy and very quiet and very attached to my older brother. He was like my friend, basically, and I would follow him and his friends around, which meant I spent a lot of time with boys growing up, and I didn't really have a lot of female friends until I started probably like first grade. And I just remember like not always really knowing how to do that, like how to like be in these groups of female friends. So I would read these books and have these female friends in books, but of course like my choices were like Ramona Quimby, Meg from like the Wrinkle in Time series and things like that. So like it probably wasn't the girliest group of book friends, but but that was like how I actually, in a lot of ways, learned how to navigate female relationships was through books. I mean, I remember once having this experience, like I was much older, I was like in my 20s, and a friend of mine looked at me and said like, oh yeah, I've never read Little Women. And I just looked at her, I'm like, how did you know who you wanted to be when you grew up if you didn't read Little Women? Like, how did you know if you were a Jo or a Meg or a Beth or an Amy? And that was like a lot of, like, rather than actually going out and having social relationships, I would read about them and then like just kind of test that out and see like, well, maybe this works like it did in this book, maybe not. And so, but yeah, it definitely like got me through like feelings of loneliness a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, specifically, you guys wanted to talk about print books. Do you feel that the experience of reading a print book, of connecting to the story, is different when you're reading a print book versus like an ebook or an audiobook? Maybe, you know, just let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that that is a conversation that's certainly being picked up in quite a few places, especially recently, especially the last few years.
I would say there's a huge difference, and I would say that, you know, I go online and I'll read, you know, maybe some news stories, but to have a book, and I, as a book collector, I have a lot of very old books. I've come across things that have been pressed in them. There's a really old one that had a flower that was from maybe the 1800s that had been smushed in there. And notes, I actually just found a book that had letters from World War II by a Doolittle raider, and I sent them back to his family because I thought they would want, you know, the things that you found in the book. And, you know, if you don't get that with the digital media. You can't fold a page over, you can't underline, you can, but, you know, it's not tactile in the way, and it's not, you know, it's to dog-ear a page and come back to that passage, it's not the same as making a favorite or a bookmark online. And, you know, it's just sort of a, you know, a keepsake even, and you can give them as gifts, you can, you know, in a way that the digital media doesn't allow. And it's just so personal in a way that I would say that digital media will never be able to replace.
Yeah, I may be unusual on this topic that I don't, by nature, have a tendency to be terribly nostalgic or sentimental. Like, it's just, it's not in my nature, but I do feel like I read different formats very differently. And I agree with you. I really like digital formats for news. I really like digital formats for sort of creative nonfiction, personal stories, essays, things like that. I find that is a really easy and convenient way to access it. And I actually, in certain ways, I find it intriguing that digital formats have kind of opened up publishing to people that would not have previously had access to publishing. But on the other hand, I also know that I retain information really differently on a digital format than I do on a physical format, like a book or a magazine or a newspaper. And my concentration level is very different. And so I do, and as a librarian, one of the things I'm always concerned about is access issues. And even if it seems like a relatively low threshold to us, the ability to own an e-reader, charge that e-reader, maintain an account that may require you to have a credit card. I mean, there's a significant number of barriers that also concerns me when you're talking about electronic media that I think books allow us to preserve in a way that we can't right now with digital media, and I don't really foresee how we would. I'm not going to say it's impossible with digital media because I don't know where it's going to go, but I agree. I feel like books allow us to archive our history and safeguard it in a way that's very, very different, not only in the sense that it is a physical object that you don't need a second device to access. But also what you were talking about the personal history of books, of the note-taking in books, of the different editions, the different bindings, and that all has a history all on its own that speaks a lot about craftsmanship in different eras and how we treated information in different eras. So I think actual physical print is gives us a really rich sense of who we are and where we're going in a way that maybe we don't get through other mediums.
Absolutely. I would say also maybe you can't really edit a book that's, a physical book in a way that, like, has this story been changed online? Is it abridged? Is it condensed? And what am I missing? And, to have that first edition and sort of know that this is how the story originally was. And, fortunate enough to be able to read other languages, to read it in the, original language. So many things are different. And, maybe some things are lost in, translation to digital that,
And I have real concerns about that, especially as we, there's been a movement with certain books to edit out offensive language.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And it's a very complicated issue. Like,
absolutely.
there's certain language that is in books because it was commonplace at the time, but it's not really central to the story. And I completely understand the urge to just be like, well, we don't want to use this highly, highly offensive term that isn't really a part of the storytelling here. It was simply a common or more common language at the time. But to do that in a digital manner means you've lost the history that is how the book was published. Absolutely. And that was how we spoke about people at the time. And that may be an unpleasant part of our history, but it's a part of our history.
There are some unpleasant things, and I think to have them and learn about them and say, like, I don't want this to happen again. I want to learn from this. If that's lost, it's sort of, it scares me a little bit.
Yeah, there's an ability to just pretend unpleasant things didn't exist.
Happen,
So do you feel that in our current age, this particular era where everything is digital, that a lot of those things are causing us, a lot of those circumstances are causing us to almost crave a return to print? Or do you feel like print books have maintained their relevance essentially in the same ways over time? Do you feel like there's
I think initially people, when digital formats were starting to come out, people were like, oh my gosh, there's going to be absolutely no books left. There's going to be a computer instead of a library. But I think sort of like with records, you see that people are collecting records again, and there's record players for sale, and artists are releasing their music on vinyl, and contemporary artists. That people don't want to lose that because they've been around for so long, and I think it's such a part of us that it really, I don't think they will go away. But I think we're maybe appreciating them for different reasons, like you said, the history of the publishing, the paper, the binding, the craftsmanship there. There's a lot of history that is interesting in itself.
Well. Okay. Well, and I know about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, there was a rather large study put out about retention levels with different media, and it did show that, like, a print book, you do retain information in a different way, in a deeper way than you do with e-media. And I believe the recommendation of this was that, like, academic institutions should not completely move away from print material because students learn better. But I think we're seeing, like, sort of a circular, like, I think the two mediums are kind of working off each other. Like, there are certain ways that, like, ebooks have made self-publishing a lot easier.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, like, sort of opened up avenues, like, that used to require, like, getting past these cultural gatekeepers. And that's not as prevalent anymore. But I think that's also leading to sort of just more reading in general. And more reading in general, I think, leads to more books. And I think even very young people, I know, like my niece who's 12, like her and her friends, like if they want to read a book, they still want a book. They use their e-readers in much the same way I do, where they will, like, read articles and they'll, like, chat with each other. But, like, when they want to read a story, like, they're very likely to just pick up a book.
I've also seen, because for my website, I do social media for that, and I have an Instagram, and I notice a lot of young kids taking photos of their shelves, and it's called a shelfie, and they'll photograph, but they'll be books, and they'll be so proud of them.
All right, well, you've certainly given us a lot to think about, and thank you for coming down and sharing your insights with us. We're very glad to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.